Okay, so you're not gonna believe what happened to me last month. I mean, seriously, I'm still processing this whole thing and it's been keeping me up at night. So sit back, grab a coffee or whatever you're drinking, because this is one hell of a story. It all started on a random Tuesday afternoon. You know those days where nothing special's supposed to happen? Yeah, one of those. I was in my son Jake's old room. Well, I guess I should say it's still his room, but he moved out about 3 years ago. He's 27 now, got his own apartment across town, good job, the whole 9 yards. Anyway, I was finally getting around to cleaning out his closet because we were thinking about turning the room into a home office or something. My wife Karen had been nagging me about it for months, and I kept putting it off because, there's something kind of sad about erasing the last traces of your kid's childhood, even when they're a full grown adult. So there I was, pulling out old boxes of action figures, dusty textbooks from high school, a couple of baseball trophies from Little League, all that nostalgic stuff that makes you feel old as hell. I was getting pretty deep into the closet, like way in the back where you forget things even exist, when my hand hit something wedged between the wall and the side panel of the closet. At first, I thought it was just a piece of cardboard or maybe an old poster that had slipped down there, but when I pulled it out, I realized it was an envelope. Now, this wasn't just any envelope, it was one of those fancy cream-colored ones, kind of thick, like the kind you'd use for a wedding invitation or something really important. And it was sealed. The thing that really caught my attention, though, was what was written on the front in Jake's handwriting. And I'd recognize that chicken scratch anywhere because the kid never had the neatest penmanship. It said, "To Mom and Dad, please read this when I'm gone." I'm not gonna lie, my heart just about stopped right there. I mean, what the hell, right? When I'm gone, what's that supposed to mean? My hand started shaking a little bit as I just stood there staring at this envelope, and about a million terrible thoughts started racing through my mind. Was my son planning something awful back then? Was he depressed? Did we miss something huge? I practically ran downstairs to find Karen. She was in the kitchen making dinner, chopping vegetables for some kind of stir fry, and she looked up at me with this confused expression because I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. "What's wrong?" she asked, putting down the knife. I held up the envelope and my voice was shaking when I said, "I found this in Jake's closet. It's addressed to us, and it says to read it when he's gone." The color just drained from her face. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and came over, taking the envelope from me like it was some kind of fragile artifact. We both just stared at it for what felt like forever. "Should we call him?" Karen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I said. "I mean, yeah, maybe, but what if he doesn't want us to know about this? What if opening it now ruins something?" We stood there in the kitchen, both of us frozen, trying to figure out what the right move was. Finally, Karen said, "We need to open it. If something was wrong, we need to know. If something is wrong, we need to know." I nodded, even though my stomach was in knots. Karen carefully opened the envelope. She was being so gentle with it, like if she tore it wrong, something terrible would happen. Inside was a letter, written on regular notebook paper, folded up nice and neat. The handwriting was definitely Jake's, but it looked younger somehow, like maybe he wrote it when he was a teenager. Karen unfolded it, and we both leaned in to read it together. This is what it said. "Dear Mom and Dad, if you're reading this, it means I'm not around anymore, or maybe I moved out and you finally got around to cleaning my room. Either way, I guess it's time you knew the truth about something that happened a long time ago, something that I've been carrying around for years and never had the guts to tell you about. You remember when I was 15, back in sophomore year in high school? That year was rough for me. I know you guys knew I was going through some stuff, but you didn't know the half of it. I was dealing with a lot, school was hard, I was getting bullied by some guys on the football team, and I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. I didn't tell you about most of it because I didn't want to make you worry, and honestly, I thought I could handle it on my own. But there was this one night, November 14th specifically, when things got really bad. Like, really bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I thought about ending things. I had it all planned out and everything. I was sitting in my room with a bottle of pills I'd taken from the medicine cabinet, and I was seriously going to do it. I know this is probably shocking to read, and I'm sorry for dropping this bomb on you like this, but I need you to understand what happened next. Right before I was about to go through with it, my phone buzzed. It was a text from this girl in English class, Emma. Remember her? You met her a couple times. Anyway, her text said something like, "Hey, I just wanted to say I think you're really cool and I'm glad we're friends." That was it. Nothing deep or life-changing or whatever. Just a simple, nice text. And for some reason, that stopped me. I sat there crying for like an hour, just holding my phone, reading that text over and over. It sounds stupid, I know, but it reminded me that maybe I mattered to somebody, maybe things could get better. So I put the pills back and I promised myself that if I made it through that night, I'd try to turn things around. And I did. I started seeing the school counselor. You guys thought I was just going to study sessions, but I was actually talking to Mr. Peterson about everything. He helped me a lot. Things slowly got better after that. I never told you about any of this because I didn't want to make you feel like you failed as parents or something. You didn't. You guys were great. I was just a messed up kid who didn't know how to ask for help. The reason I'm writing this letter is because I want you to know the truth, but I'm too scared to tell you in person. I'm scared you'll look at me differently or blame yourselves or something. So I'm hiding this letter somewhere in my room, and maybe someday you'll find it, maybe you won't. But if you do, just know that I'm okay now, or I was okay when I wrote this, and I love you guys more than anything. Also, there's something else I need to tell you about, something that happened because of that night. Karen and I looked at each other with tears streaming down our faces. I could barely breathe. My son, my boy, I couldn't even finish the thought. Karen was sobbing, one hand covering her mouth, the other clutching the letter. "There's more," she managed to say, pointing at the letter. "He said there's something else." I wiped my eyes and kept reading. So after that night, I kind of became obsessed with the idea of paying it forward, you know? Emma's text saved my life, even though she had no idea what she'd done. I started thinking about how small acts of kindness can have these huge ripple effects, and I wanted to be that for other people. I started volunteering at this crisis hotline. I lied about my age, said I was 18 when I was really only 16, but I did the online training and everything. For 2 years, all through junior and senior year, I'd sneak out of the house 3 nights a week and go to this community center downtown where they ran the hotline. You guys thought I was at the library studying or hanging out with friends, but I was answering calls from people who were in dark places, just like I'd been. I probably talked to hundreds of people during those 2 years. Most of them I'll never know what happened to, but there was this one guy, probably in his 30s, who called one night during my senior year. He was calling from his car, said he had a gun, said he couldn't take it anymore. He'd lost his job, his wife had left him, he'd lost custody of his kids, his whole life had fallen apart. We talked for 3 hours that night. 3 hours. I almost missed my curfew, and I had to lie and say I'd been at a friend's house working on a group project, but I stayed on the phone with that guy, and I told him about the night I almost gave up, about Emma's text, about how things got better for me. I told him his kids needed him, even if he couldn't see them right now. I told him that pain is temporary, but death is permanent. Eventually, he agreed to call 911, and I stayed on the line with him until I heard the sirens in the background. He thanked me before he hung up, and that was the last time I ever heard from him. But here's the thing. About 6 months later, right before I graduated, I got a letter at the crisis center. It was from that guy. He'd somehow tracked down where the call came from and sent a letter addressed to the young man who saved my life on March 3rd. In the letter, he told me he'd gotten help, gone to therapy, found a new job, and was rebuilding his relationship with his kids. He said I gave him hope when he had none left, and he'd never forget what I did for him. He didn't ask for my name or try to find me. He just wanted me to know that I'd made a difference. I've kept that letter hidden in my room all these years. It's in a box under my bed, wrapped in a blue bandana. If you're reading this letter, you should read that one too. It'll probably make more sense then. Mom and Dad, I know this is a lot to take in. I know you're probably freaking out right now, wondering how you missed all the signs, blaming yourselves for not knowing. Please don't. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes kids hide things because they're scared or ashamed or they don't want to be a burden. That was me. But I need you to know that you raised me to be someone who cares about others, someone who wants to make the world a little better. That night when I almost gave up, I didn't, partly because of Emma, but also partly because somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought about you guys and how devastated you'd be. I thought about all the things you'd taught me about not giving up, about pushing through hard times. So, in a weird way, you saved me that night just as much as Emma did. I don't know when you'll find this letter or what my life will be like when you do. Maybe I'll have a family of my own by then. Maybe I'll be doing something amazing with my life. Or maybe I'll just be a regular guy with a regular job, and that's okay too. Whatever it is, I hope you're proud of me. I hope you know that I turned out okay despite that rough patch. And if for some reason I'm not around when you read this letter, if something happened to me, please don't be sad. I lived a full life and I made a difference, even if it was just for one person on a crisis hotline at 3 a.m. I love you both so much. Thank you for everything. Your son, Jake. P.S. Mom, remember that time I told you I wanted to be a psychologist? This is why. I want to help people the way Mr. Peterson and that crisis hotline helped me. Just thought you should know. By the time we finished reading, both Karen and I were complete messes. We were holding on to each other, crying so hard we could barely stand up. All these years, we had no idea that our son had been that close to doing something we couldn't even bear to think about. And all those nights we thought he was at the library or studying with friends, he was out there saving other people's lives. Karen looked at me with red, puffy eyes and said, "We need to find that other letter, the one under his bed." I nodded and we practically ran back upstairs to Jake's room. My hands were still shaking as I got down on my knees and looked under the bed. Sure enough, there was a box pushed way back against the wall. I pulled it out, and right on top, wrapped in a faded blue bandana, just like Jake had said, was another envelope. This one wasn't addressed to us. It was older, the paper a little yellower, and when I unwrapped it, I could see it had been opened and read many times. The creases were worn soft. Karen sat down next to me on Jake's old bed, and I opened the letter. The handwriting was messy, like someone had written it in a hurry or maybe while they were emotional. It started, "To the young man who saved my life on March 3rd. And then this stranger went on to tell his whole story. He talked about how he was sitting in his car in some parking lot with a gun in his lap, completely ready to end everything. He described the desperation, the feeling that there was no way out, no light at the end of the tunnel. Then he talked about calling the hotline as a last-ditch effort, not really believing anyone could help him, but making the call anyway. He wrote about how this kid, our kid, though he didn't know it at the time, had answered the phone and just listened. Really listened. He said Jake didn't judge him, didn't try to give him some bullshit pep talk, didn't pretend to have all the answers. Jake just shared his own story, his own pain, and somehow that made all the difference. The guy wrote that he'd gotten professional help after that night, started taking medication for depression, found a new job at a shipping company, and was recently been allowed supervised visits with his 2 daughters. He said he was taking it one day at a time, but for the first time in years, he actually wanted to wake up in the morning. He wanted to see what came next. And then, at the end of the letter, he wrote something that absolutely destroyed me. "I don't know who you are, and I'll never try to find you because I want to respect your privacy. But I need you to know that you didn't just save one life that night, you saved 3. My daughters still have a father because of you. They're 7 and 9 years old, and they're gonna grow up knowing their dad, having memories with him, because you took the time to talk to a stranger. I hope you go on to do amazing things with your life. But even if you don't, even if you never help another single person, you've already done enough. You've already mattered. Thank you for being there. Thank you for caring. Thank you for saving me." Karen was sobbing so hard she could barely catch her breath. I wasn't much better. We just sat there on our son's bed, holding this letter from a stranger whose life our boy had saved, and it was like seeing Jake in a completely different light. "We have to call him," Karen said, her voice cracking. "We have to call him right now." I looked at my watch and it was almost 7:30. Jake would probably be home from work by now. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my phone out of my pocket, and I had to try 3 times before I managed to dial his number correctly. It rang 4 times, and with each ring, my heart was pounding harder. Finally, he picked up. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" Jake sounded so normal, so casual, like it was just another weekday evening. "Jake, My voice broke and I couldn't get the words out. Karen grabbed the phone from me. "Honey, it's Mom. We need you to come over right now. Like, right now. Are you busy?" There was a pause and I could hear the concern in Jake's voice when he responded, "Is everything okay? Did something happen? Is Dad okay?" "We're fine. We're both fine, but we found something and we really need to talk to you. Can you come over?" "Yeah, of course. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Just come over, sweetheart. We'll explain everything when you get here." Those 20 minutes felt like the longest 20 minutes of my entire life. Karen and I went back downstairs, and we just sat at the kitchen table in complete silence, both letters spread out in front of us. Neither of us could find words. What do you even say? How do you process something like this? I kept thinking about Jake at 15 sitting in his room with a bottle of pills, feeling so alone and hopeless. I kept thinking about all those nights he snuck out to volunteer at the crisis hotline, all those people he helped, all those lives he touched. And we had no idea. We were his parents, and we had no freaking idea. Part of me felt a failure. How did we not see that he was struggling? What kind of parents were we? But another part of me, the part that had just read that letter from the stranger, felt this overwhelming sense of pride. Our son had taken his pain and turned it into purpose. He'd transformed his darkest moment into a mission to help others. Finally, we heard Jake's car pull into the driveway.
Karen and I looked at each other, and I could see she was trying to compose herself, wiping her eyes one more time. The front door opened, and Jake came rushing in, still wearing his work clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "Okay, what's going on? You guys are freaking me out," he said, looking back and forth between us. I gestured to the chair across from us. "Sit down, son." Jake sat down slowly, his eyes landing on the letters on the table. I watched his face change as he recognized them. His eyes went wide and all the color drained from his cheeks. "Oh my God," he whispered. "You found them." "Yeah," I said, my voice rough. "We found them. I was cleaning out your closet and the letter to us was wedged behind the wall panel." Jake put his head in his hands. "I always wondered if you'd ever find that. Part of me hoped you would, part of me hoped you wouldn't." Karen reached across the table and grabbed his hand. "Jake, honey, why didn't you ever tell us about any of it?" He looked up at us, and his eyes were already filling with tears. "Because I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. I didn't want you guys to think you'd failed me or that I was weak or broken or something. And by the time I was doing better, it felt like it was too late to bring it up. Like, how do you casually mention at dinner that you almost killed yourself 2 years ago?" "You could have told us," I said, and my voice cracked again. "We're your parents. We would have understood. We would have helped." "I know that now," Jake said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "But when you're 15 and depressed and everything feels hopeless, you don't think clearly. You think everyone's better off without you. You think you're just a burden." Karen was crying again. "We had no idea you were being bullied. You never said anything." Jake laughed, but it was a sad laugh. That's kinda the point of bullying, Mom. The kids who do it make sure you feel like you can't tell anyone. They make you feel like if you tell, it'll just get worse. And honestly, at the time, I believed them. We sat there for a minute, just letting everything sink in. Then I picked up the letter from the stranger and slid it across the table to Jake. We read this one too, the one you saved. Jake picked it up, and a small smile crossed his face. I've read this letter probably 100 times. Whenever I'm having a bad day or feeling like nothing I do matters, I read it. It reminds me that even the smallest actions can have the biggest impacts. Jake, Karen said softly, you saved that man's life, and his daughters got to grow up with their father because of you. Do you understand how incredible that is? He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. I just answered the phone and talked to him. Anyone could have done that. But they didn't, I said firmly. You did. You took your own pain, your own experience, and you used it to help someone else. That takes courage. That takes strength. Jake was quiet for a moment, then he looked at both of us. I need to tell you guys something else. Something I haven't told you yet. My heart sunk. What else could there be? The reason I went into psychology, the reason I got my master's degree in counseling, the reason I work at the Suicide Prevention Center now, it's all because of that night and those 2 years volunteering. That became my purpose. Helping people who are in the same dark place I was in, that's what I'm meant to do. Karen and I looked at each other, confused. Wait, I said, you work at a suicide prevention center? I thought you worked at that mental health clinic downtown doing intake assessments. Jake smiled a little. That's technically true, that it's a suicide prevention and crisis intervention center. I just never mentioned the suicide prevention part because I didn't want to get into the whole story about why I chose that specific field. I've been working there for 2 years now, and I run the crisis hotline 3 nights a week. Same kind of hotline I volunteered at when I was a teenager. So you're still doing it. You're still saving lives. I try. I mean, you never really know if you're making a difference in the moment, but every once in a while, someone will call back or send a message saying thank you, saying they're doing better. Those moments make it all worth it. I didn't even realize I was crying again until Jake came around the table and hugged me. Then Karen joined in, and we just stood there in the kitchen, the 3 of us holding each other and crying. I'm so sorry, Jake kept saying. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry I put you through this. Don't apologize, Karen said fiercely. Don't you dare apologize. We're just grateful you're here. We're grateful you're alive and doing what you love and helping people. We must have stood there for 10 minutes, just holding each other. Finally, we all sat back down, and I poured us each a glass of water because we all needed it after all that crying. So, I said, trying to lighten the mood a little, you mentioned Emma in your letter. Whatever happened with her? You guys were pretty good friends back in high school. Jake smiled. A real smile this time. Actually, that's kind of funny you bring her up. We lost touch after high school. She went to college in California, and I stayed here. But we reconnected on social media about a year ago, and we've been talking pretty regularly. She's actually a teacher now, works with at-risk youth. Did you ever tell her, Karen asked, about what her text meant to you? Jake nodded. Yeah, I told her a few months ago. We were on the phone and I just felt like she deserved to know. She cried. Like, really cried. She said that she'd been having a hard time lately, feeling like she wasn't making a difference in her students' lives, feeling burnt out. And hearing that story, hearing that a random text she sent when she was 15 saved someone's life, it gave her a renewed sense of purpose. So you saved her too, in a way. I guess. But she saved me first. None of the good things I've done would have happened if she hadn't sent that text. It's all connected, you know? One small act of kindness can ripple out in ways you can't even imagine. We talked for hours that night. Jake told us more about the bullying he had endured, about how isolated he had felt. The specific night he'd almost gone through with it, he described sitting on his bed, holding that bottle of pills, writing goodbye notes in his head. He told us about Mr. Peterson, the school counselor, and how those sessions had slowly helped him work through everything. He talked about the other people he'd helped at the crisis hotline over the years. Not specific details because of confidentiality, but general stories about people and pain who just needed someone to listen. And we told him about our side of things too. Karen admitted that she'd noticed he seemed withdrawn that year, but had chalked it up to typical teenage moodiness. I confessed that I'd been so wrapped up in work during that time, I was trying to make partner at my firm, that I probably wasn't as present as I should have been. We both apologized for missing the signs, even though Jake kept insisting there was nothing to apologize for. "You guys were great parents," he said for probably the 10th time. "This wasn't about you. It was about me and what I was going through internally. Depression doesn't always make sense, and it doesn't always have an obvious cause. Sometimes it just is." Around midnight, Jake finally got ready to leave. We walked him to the door, and before he left, I pulled him into another hug. "I'm proud of you," I said into his shoulder. "I've always been proud of you, but now I understand why you are the way you are, why you chose the work you chose, and I'm so damn grateful you're still here." "Me too, Dad," he said. "Me too." After he left, Karen and I went back to the kitchen and just sat there in silence for a while. The letters were still on the table, and I picked up the one Jake had written to us, reading through it again. "You know what gets me?" Karen said after a while. "He hid that letter 12 years ago. 12 years. He wrote it when he was probably 16, and he's been carrying the secret all this time, wondering if we'd ever find it. And all those nights he snuck out, we thought he was just being a normal teenager, doing homework or hanging out with friends. But he was out there manning a crisis hotline, talking people off ledges, literally saving lives." Karen shook her head in disbelief. Our son was a hero at 16, and we had no idea. Over the next few weeks, things shifted in our family. It wasn't a bad shift, but it was definitely different. Jake started coming over for dinner more often, and our conversations got deeper. We talked about mental health, about the warning signs of depression and suicide, about how to support people who are struggling. Jake educated us on a lot of stuff we didn't know, and it opened our eyes to a whole world we'd been ignorant about. One night, about a month after we'd found the letters, Jake brought someone to dinner. He'd called ahead and asked if he could bring a guest, and of course we said yes. When they arrived, Jake introduced us to a woman named Sarah. She was probably in her early 30s, had kind eyes and a warm smile. "Sarah's a coworker," Jake explained as we all sat down for dinner. "But she's also someone I wanted you guys to meet for a specific reason." Sarah smiled nervously and said, "Jake has told me a lot about you both, and about the letters you found." We made small talk through dinner. Sarah told us she was a clinical supervisor at the crisis center where Jake worked, that she'd been in the mental health field for about 8 years. She was easy to talk to, had a good sense of humor, and I could tell she and Jake had a great working relationship by the way they interacted. After dinner, we all moved to the living room, and that's when Sarah said, "There's something I need to tell you, and Jake thought it would be better if I told you in person." Karen and I exchanged a look. Here we go again, I thought. About 5 years ago, I was going through the worst period of my life. My marriage had just ended, I'd lost my job, and I was struggling with severe depression. One night, I called a crisis hotline. I was in a really dark place, and I honestly didn't think I'd make it through the night. My stomach dropped.
I had a feeling I knew where this was going. The person who answered my call was this young guy, probably early 20s at the time. He talked to me for over 2 hours. He shared his own story about struggling with depression as a teenager, about how things got better, about how he'd found purpose in helping others. He convinced me to call 911 and get help. Sarah paused, her eyes getting watery. That young guy was Jake. I didn't know it at the time. The hotline keeps everything anonymous. But when I started working at the crisis center 3 years ago and met Jake, something about him seemed familiar. The way he talked, his mannerisms, his approach to helping people. It nagged at me for months. Jake picked up the story. About 6 months ago, we were training some new volunteers, and I was sharing my own experience with depression and why I got into this work. I mentioned volunteering at a hotline as a teenager, and Sarah came up to me afterward and asked if I'd ever taken a call from a woman named Sarah who was going through a divorce. And when he said yes, we both just started crying right there in the break room. I'd been working alongside the person who saved my life for almost 3 years and had no idea. The odds of that happening are just, what are the chances? Karen reached over and grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. I wanted to meet you both, Sarah said, looking at us, because I wanted to thank you for raising such an incredible human being. Jake saved my life that night. Because of him, I got help, I got therapy, I found the right medication, and I completely turned my life around. I went back to school, got my master's in social work, and now I get to help other people the way Jake helped me. And it's all because your son cared enough to answer the phone and talk to a stranger. I couldn't speak. I literally couldn't form words. Karen was crying again. Seemed like we'd been doing a lot of that lately, and Jake was looking at us with this expression that was half proud, half embarrassed. The reason I brought Sarah tonight is because I wanted you guys to understand that the work I do, the choice I made to go into this field, it matters. I know you've always been supportive, but I don't think you fully understood why I'm so passionate about it. This is why. People like Sarah, people like that guy who wrote me the letter, they're alive because someone answered the phone. Sarah nodded. And Jake's trained dozens of volunteers over the years. He's created this ripple effect where the people he's helped and the people he's trained are now out there helping others. It's exponential. One person's decision to care, to listen, to be there for someone else, it spreads out in ways you can't even measure. We spent the rest of the evening talking, and Sarah shared more about her journey, how she'd rebuilt her life, how she'd found joy again, how she was now engaged to a wonderful man and was actually happy for the first time in years. She showed us pictures of her fiancé, talked about their plans to get married next spring, and mentioned that they were thinking about adopting kids. None of this would exist if Jake hadn't answered that call, she said. My fiancé wouldn't have met me, our future kids won't get to exist, all the people I've helped in my work wouldn't have received that help. It's a whole alternate timeline that wouldn't have happened. When Sarah and Jake left that night, Karen and I sat on the couch, both of us emotionally exhausted, but in a good way. Our son saved that woman's life, Karen said, staring at the ceiling. And now she's going to get married and maybe have kids and help hundreds of other people. And it's all because Jake answered the phone. And he almost didn't get the chance, I said quietly. If Emma hadn't sent that text, if Jake hadn't decided to keep going, none of this happens. Sarah probably doesn't make it. That guy with the 2 daughters probably doesn't make it. All the other people Jake's helped over the years, they don't get helped. It was a sobering thought. How many lives hinge on these tiny moments, these small decisions, these random acts of kindness that seem insignificant at the time? A few weeks later, Jake called us and said he wanted to take us somewhere. He wouldn't tell us where, just said to dress casually and block off Saturday afternoon. When he picked us up, he still wouldn't say where we were going, just drove us downtown to an older part of the city. He pulled up to a community center, the same one where he'd volunteered as a teenager. I want to show you something, he said.
We went inside, and Jake led us down a hallway to a room with a bunch of phones and computers. There were several young people, probably late teens, early 20s, sitting at desks, talking on phones or typing on computers. "This is the crisis hotline where I volunteered," Jake explained quietly so as not to disturb the volunteers. "It's grown a lot since I was here. They used to have maybe 5 volunteers on a shift. Now they have 15. They've expanded to text and online chat too, not just phone calls." A woman who looked to be in her 50s came over and greeted Jake warmly. "Tom, Karen, this is Patricia. She runs the center." Patricia shook our hands enthusiastically. "I've heard so much about you both. Jake's told me about the letters you found. What an incredible story." "Jake was one of our best volunteers," Patricia continued. "Even though he lied about his age to get in, we figured it out eventually but kept him on anyway, because he was just so good at what he did. He had this natural ability to connect with people, to make them feel heard." She walked us around the center, showing us the different areas: the crisis line room, a counseling area where they did walk-in sessions, a training room where they taught new volunteers. On one wall, there was a memorial board with photos and names. "These are people we've lost," Patricia explained, her voice somber. "Despite our best efforts, not everyone makes it. It's important for our volunteers to understand that they can't save everyone, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't try." Then she pointed to another wall, and this one was covered in letters, cards, and printouts of emails. "And this is our hope wall. These are messages from people we've helped, people who called or texted or chatted with us during their darkest moments and lived to tell about it. Some come back months later to volunteer. Some send letters. Some just want us to know they're okay." I walked over to the wall and started reading some of the messages. "You saved my life. I called 2 years ago and I'm doing so much better now. Thank you for listening when no one else would. I'm a father again because of you." That last one made me stop. I turned to Jake. "Is this?" He nodded. "Yeah, that's from the die. He sent that about a year after I talked to him. I'd already left the center by then, but Patricia knew it was me and kept it up there." Karen was reading the messages too, tears streaming down her face. There were dozens of them, maybe over 100. Each one represented a life saved, a person who'd found hope, a family that didn't have to plan a funeral. "Jake's story is one of many," Patricia said. "We have volunteers who came to us because they'd been helped by someone here. We have people who lost loved ones to suicide and now work here to prevent others from experiencing that same loss. Everyone here has a story, a reason why they do this work." One of the young volunteers finished his call and came over. He couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. "Hey, Jake," he said, fist bumping him. "Didn't know you were coming by today." "Just showing my parents around. How's your shift going?" "Good, man. Just talked to someone for like 40 minutes. She was having a panic attack, convinced she was dying. Walked her through some breathing exercises, got her calmed down. She's going to call her therapist tomorrow to talk about adjusting her meds." The casual way he talked about potentially saving someone's life was striking. This was just another shift for him, another person in crisis, another opportunity to help. But for that woman on the other end of the line, it was everything. It was the difference between spiraling into complete panic and getting the help she needed. Jake introduced us to a few more volunteers, and each one had their own story. There was Marcus, a college student who'd attempted suicide twice and now volunteered to give back. There was Linda, a retired teacher whose son had died by suicide 5 years ago, and she'd channeled her grief into helping others. There was Danny, who'd been homeless for 3 years and had called the hotline multiple times before getting connected to resources that turned his life around. Every single person in that room had a connection to the cause, a reason why they were there, answering phones at 4 in the afternoon instead of doing literally anything else. Before we left, Patricia pulled us aside. "I don't know if Jake told you this, but he's actually on our board of directors now. He helps with fundraising, volunteer training, and program development. He's been instrumental in expanding our services." Jake looked embarrassed. "It's not a big deal. I just go to some meetings and give input." "It's a huge deal," Patricia corrected him. "Last year, Jake helped us secure a grant that allowed us to extend our hours to 24/7.
Before that, we could only operate from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Now we're available around the clock. That's hundreds more calls we can answer, hundreds more people we can help. As we drove home, Karen and I were both quiet, processing everything we'd seen and heard. Finally, Karen said, "I'm so glad I didn't know about any of this when it was happening." Jay glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if we'd known you were sneaking out at 16 to man a suicide hotline, we probably would have stopped you. We would have been worried about it being too much for you, too heavy, not appropriate for a teenager. But you needed to do it, didn't you? It was part of your healing." Jake was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, it was. Every time I helped someone, it reminded me that I'd made the right choice to stay alive. It gave me purpose when I felt purposeless. It made my pain mean something." "That's beautiful," I said from the passenger seat. "Taking your worst experience and transforming it into your greatest strength. Not everyone can do that." "Not everyone has the support system I had. Even though you guys didn't know the details, you were always there. You loved me unconditionally. You encouraged me to pursue psychology when I said I was interested in it. You paid for my education. You celebrated my successes and supported me through my failures. I couldn't have done any of this without you." When we got home, the three of us sat in the driveway for a bit, not quite ready to end the day. "Can I ask you something?" I said to Jake. "That letter you wrote, the one we found, you said to read it when you were gone. Did you mean when you were dead or when you moved out?" Jake laughed a little. "Honestly, when I wrote it at 16, I meant it when I was dead. I was hedging my bets, I guess. Like if I ever went through with it, at least you'd understand why. But as I got older and never moved the letter, I started thinking of it differently. By the time I moved out, I thought of it more as when I'm gone from this house, rather than gone from this world. I guess part of me always wanted you to find it eventually, but I was too chicken to just hand it to you." "I'm glad we found it," Karen said. "Even though it was painful to read, I'm glad we know. I'm glad we understand you better now." "Me too," Jake said. "It feels good not having that secret anymore, like a weight's been lifted." Over the following months, our relationship with Jake deepened in ways I never expected. We started having real conversations about mental health, about the struggles people face, about the importance of checking in on people even when they seem fine. Jake educated us on warning signs of depression and suicide, on how to talk to someone who might be struggling, on resources that are available. Karen got so inspired by everything that she started volunteering at the crisis center herself. She went through the training program, which Jake actually helped teach, and started working 1 shift a week. At first, I thought she was crazy. She's a dental hygienist, not a mental health professional, but she was great at it. She had this warm, motherly quality that put people at ease, and Patricia told me more than once that Karen was a natural. As for me, I started donating to the crisis center regularly and helped Jake with some of the fundraising efforts. I used my connections from work to get local businesses involved, to sponsor events, to spread awareness. It felt good to be part of something meaningful, something that was literally saving lives. One day, about 6 months after we'd found the letters, I got a call from Jake, asking if I could meet him for coffee. There was something in his voice, a nervousness maybe, that made me say yes immediately. We met at a cafe near his apartment, and after we ordered, he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture. It was a screenshot of a text message. "Remember Emma, the girl who sent me that text when I was 15? "Of course. You said you reconnected with her recently." "Yeah, well," Jake smiled, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. "We've been dating for the past 3 months. It started out as just catching up, but then we realized we had this really strong connection. She moved back to town last year for work, and we've been spending a lot of time together." I looked at the screenshot more closely. It was from Emma, and it said, "I can't believe I almost let you slip away twice. First when we lost contact after high school, and now I realize if I hadn't sent that text all those years ago, you wouldn't be here. I don't believe in fate, but this feels pretty close to it." "Dad," Jake said, looking me in the eye, "I'm gonna marry this woman. I know it's only been 3 months officially, but I've known her for over a decade. She saved my life, even though she didn't know it, and now I get to spend my life with her. How crazy is that? I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. That's incredible, son. Have you told her you're planning to propose? Not yet, he said. I want to do it right. I'm thinking maybe at the crisis center, in front of the Hope Wall. Seems fitting, you know? That place represents everything about our story, about how one moment of kindness can change everything. She's gonna say yes, I said confidently. Anyone would be lucky to marry you. Jake proposed to Emma 3 weeks later, and yes, he did it at the crisis center in front of the Hope Wall. He'd arranged for Patricia to give Emma a tour of the facility. Emma had been curious about Jake's work, and when they got to the Hope Wall, Jake was standing there waiting. Karen and I were there too, hiding around the corner with Patricia and some of the volunteers. Jake had asked us to be there for it, and we wouldn't have missed it for the world. Emma came around the corner and saw Jake standing there, and she immediately knew something was up. Jake took her hands and said, 13 years ago, you sent me a text message that saved my life. You had no idea what I was going through, no idea how much I needed to hear that somebody cared. That text changed everything for me. It put me on a path that led me to this work, to helping other people, to becoming the person I am today. Emma was already crying. And then, Jake continued, after all these years, we found each other again. And I realized that you weren't just the person who saved my life once, you're the person I want to spend my life with. You're kind, compassionate, dedicated to helping kids who are struggling, and you make me laugh every single day. You're my best friend and the love of my life. He got down on one knee and Emma gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Emma, will you marry me? Yes, she sobbed. Yes, of course, yes. Everyone came out from their hiding spots, cheering and clapping. It was one of the most beautiful moments I've ever witnessed. Emma hugged Jake, then hugged Karen and me, crying and laughing at the same time. I can't believe this is happening, she kept saying. I can't believe you're all here. I can't believe this is real. Patricia brought out sparkling cider. The crisis center doesn't keep alcohol around for obvious reasons. And we had an impromptu celebration right there in the center. Some of the volunteers on duty took a quick break to congratulate them, and everyone was just so genuinely happy for Jake and Emma. Later, after things calmed down, Emma pulled me aside. Can I tell you something? She said. Of course. When Jake told me about that night, about what my text meant to him, I was shocked. But I was also grateful, you know? I've been feeling so purposeless in my work, like I wasn't making a difference. And then I found out that I'd saved someone's life without even knowing it. It reminded me that we never really know the impact we have on other people. Jake said something similar, I told her, about how small acts of kindness ripple out in ways we can't measure. Emma nodded. After he told me that story, I changed how I interact with my students. I make sure to say something encouraging to each one of them, even if it's just a small compliment or acknowledgement. Because what if one of them needs to hear it? What if one of them is having the worst day of their life, and my words are the thing that helps them get through it? You're going to be a wonderful addition to this family, I said, meaning every word. The wedding was set for the following spring, and the months leading up to it were full of planning and excitement. Emma's parents flew in from California, and our families got along great. Emma's mom told us that Emma had always been sensitive and caring, always the kid who befriended the loners at school and stood up for kids who were being bullied. She used to come home crying about other kids' problems. She'd worry about her classmates like they were their own siblings. We always knew she'd end up in a helping profession. The wedding itself was beautiful. They got married in a small ceremony at a botanical garden with about 80 guests. Jake asked me to be his best man, which absolutely destroyed me in the best way. In my speech, I talked about the letters we had found, about learning who our son really was, about the incredible work he'd been doing for years without us knowing. My son is a hero, I said, looking at Jake and Emma at the head table. He took the worst moment of his life and turned it into his life's mission. He saved lives, trained others to save lives, and created a ripple effect of kindness and hope that extends far beyond what any of us can measure. And Emma, you started that ripple 13 years ago with a simple text message. You two were always meant to find each other. You were always meant to be together. There was not a dry eye in the room. Emma's maid of honor, her best friend from college, talked about how Emma had helped her through a difficult breakup, how Emma was always the friend who showed up, who listened, who cared. She said, Emma and Jake are perfect for each other because they both have this incredible capacity to see people who are hurting and to help them feel less alone. They're going to change the world together. After the wedding, Jake and Emma bought a house not too far from us. Emma continued teaching, and Jake kept working at the crisis center, while also starting a private practice where he specialized in treating depression and trauma. They were building a life together, a good life, full of purpose and meaning. About a year after the wedding, Emma called Karen and asked if we could all get together for dinner. When we arrived at their house, Jake and Emma were both grinning like idiots. "We have some news," Emma said, practically bouncing with excitement. I looked at Karen and we both immediately knew. "I'm pregnant," Emma announced. "We're having a baby." Karen screamed and ran over to hug her. I shook Jake's hand, then pulled him into a hug too. "Congratulations, son. You're going to be a great dad." "I hope so," Jake said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. I keep thinking about how I almost didn't get to have this. A wife, a baby on the way, a career I love, a life worth living. I almost threw all of this away when I was 15. "But you didn't," I said firmly. "You chose to stay. You chose to fight. And look at everything that choice created." Over dinner that night, we talked about names and nursery colors and all the normal stuff expectant parents discuss. But at one point, Jake got serious. He said, "I want our kid to grow up understanding the importance of kindness. I want them to know that their words and actions matter, that they can make a difference in someone's life without even realizing it. I want them to be like their mom, someone who instinctively reaches out to people who are struggling." Emma squeezed his hand. "And I want them to be like their dad, someone who turns pain into purpose, who helps others heal from their own wounds." "They're going to be lucky to have you both," Karen said, wiping her eyes. She'd been crying happy tears all evening. The pregnancy went smoothly, and 9 months later, we got the call we'd been waiting for. Emma was in labor. We rushed to the hospital and waited anxiously in the waiting room with Emma's parents. After what felt like forever, but was really only about 6 hours, Jake came out with the biggest smile on his face. "It's a girl, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Emma is doing great, and the baby's perfect. You want to meet your granddaughter?" We followed him back to the room, and there was Emma, exhausted but glowing, holding this tiny little bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Karen and I just stood there at the doorway for a moment, completely overwhelmed. Our granddaughter, Jake's daughter, this little life that almost never got the chance to exist.
"Come here," Emma said softly, gesturing us closer. "Come meet her." We walked over, and Emma carefully placed the baby in Karen's arms. Karen started crying immediately. Happy tears, overwhelmed tears, grateful tears. The baby had a little tuft of dark hair and the tiniest fingers I'd ever seen. "She's perfect," Karen whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What's her name?" I asked, looking at Jake and Emma. They looked at each other and smiled. "Grace," Jake said. "Grace Emma Patterson." "Grace," I repeated, feeling the weight of that name. "That's beautiful." "It felt right," Emma explained, "because Grace is what saved Jake that night. Grace in the form of a text message, in the form of compassion from strangers, in the form of second chances. And we want her to carry that with her, the idea that we're all here because of small moments of grace." I held my granddaughter for the first time, this tiny person who weighed almost nothing, but somehow held the weight of an entire legacy. I thought about everything that had to happen for her to exist. Emma sending that text 13 years ago, Jake choosing to stay alive, Jake volunteering at the crisis hotline and discovering his purpose, Emma and Jake reconnecting after all those years, all these tiny dominoes falling in exactly the right order. "You know what's wild?" Jake said, watching me hold Grace. "If I'd gone through with it that night, none of this exists. Not just Grace, but all the people I've helped over the years. Sarah doesn't get help, and she doesn't become a social worker who helps others. That guy with the 2 daughters doesn't get to watch them grow up. All the volunteers I've trained don't get trained, and they don't help the people they've helped. It's like
my decision to live created this whole tree of life, branching out in a million different directions. That's the ripple effect, Emma added. Every choice we make, every kind word we speak, every time we choose compassion over indifference, it all matters. It all spreads out. We stayed at the hospital for a few hours, taking turns holding Grace, watching her sleep, marveling at how something so small could be so perfect. Jake's in-laws came in, and there was more crying and celebrating. At one point, Jake's phone buzzed, and he looked at it and smiled. "It's Sarah," he said. "Somehow word got around at the crisis center that Emma had the baby. She says congratulations and that she can't wait to meet Grace." "You should invite her and her fiancé over once we're settled," Emma said. "I'd love to get to know her better. She's such a big part of our story." Over the next few weeks, we visited Jake and Emma often, helping out where we could, bringing food, holding Grace while they napped. Being grandparents was everything I'd heard it would be, all the joy of having a baby around without the sleep deprivation and constant worry. One afternoon, when Grace was about 3 weeks old, I was over at their house while Emma napped and Jake worked on some paperwork. I was holding Grace, rocking her gently, when Jake looked up from his laptop. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about alternate timelines? Like, what if you'd never cleaned out my closet? What if you never found those letters?" I thought about it. "Yeah, I do sometimes. I mean, we'd still love you just the same. We'd still be proud of you. But I think there'd always be this distance, this part of you we didn't fully understand. Finding those letters, learning about everything you went through and everything you've done, it brought us closer. It helped me understand who you really are." Jake nodded slowly. "I spent so many years being afraid of you finding out, afraid you'd be disappointed or think less of me. But when you actually found the letters, the opposite happened. You understood me better. You got involved in the work. Mom started volunteering at the crisis center. It brought our whole family together in this new way. Sometimes the things we're most afraid to share are the things that end up connecting us the most. Your vulnerability, your honesty in those letters, that was a gift, even if you didn't mean it that way at the time." Grace made a little noise, and we both smiled. She was starting to wake up, her tiny face scrunching up. "She's gonna know all of this," Jake said. "When she's old enough, we're gonna tell her the whole story, about the text message, about the crisis hotline, about how her parents found each other. We want her to grow up understanding that her life has meaning, that she's here because people chose kindness." "That's a beautiful legacy to give her," I said. A few months later, the Crisis Center held their annual fundraising gala. It was a big event: dinner, silent auction, speeches from people who'd been helped by the center. Jake was giving the keynote speech, and Emma was being honored for her work with at-risk youth, and for volunteering to speak at schools about mental health awareness. Karen and I got dressed up and went to the event, which was held at a nice hotel downtown. The ballroom was packed, probably 300 people. Patricia greeted us at the door and showed us to our table, which was right up front near the stage. "Your son's speech is going to blow everyone away. I've seen the draft, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room when he practiced it for the board." The evening started with dinner and the silent auction. I bid on a weekend getaway package and some sports memorabilia, more to support the cause than because I actually wanted the stuff. Then, Patricia got up on stage to introduce the evening's program. She talked about the center's growth over the past year. They'd expanded their services, hired more staff, answered over 15,000 crisis calls. She shared some statistics about suicide rates and mental health, reminding everyone why this work was so important. Then, she introduced Emma. "Our next honoree is a high school teacher who's made it her mission to break the stigma around mental health. She's created a peer support program at her school, she speaks openly with her students about her own struggles with anxiety, and she's trained over 100 teachers in how to recognize warning signs of mental health crises. Please welcome Emma Patterson." Emma walked up on stage, and I could see she was nervous. Public speaking wasn't her favorite thing. But once she started talking, she was confident and articulate. "When I was 15, Emma began, I sent a text message to a boy in my English class. It was just a simple message. I told him I thought he was cool, and I was glad we were friends. I sent it on a whim because I'd noticed he seemed sad lately, and I wanted him to know somebody cared. I had no idea that he was sitting in his room at that exact moment, contemplating suicide.
I had no idea that my text would make him put down the pills he was holding. I had no idea I'd saved his life. The room was completely silent. I didn't find out about any of this until years later when that boy, now my husband, told me the whole story. And when he told me, I was shocked. I'd sent hundreds, maybe thousands of texts in my life. Most of them were meaningless. But this one, this random message I sent without thinking too hard about it, had literally saved someone's life. She paused, looking out at the audience. That experience changed how I see the world. It made me realize that we never really know what other people are going through. The quiet kid in the back of the classroom might be fighting battles we can't see. The colleague who seems fine might be barely holding it together. And sometimes all it takes is one small gesture, a text, a smile, a kind word, to make the difference between life and death. She went on to talk about her work with students, about creating safe spaces for them to talk about mental health, about teaching them how to look out for each other. She talked about the peer support program she'd started, where students were trained to recognize warning signs and connect their friends with resources. We can all be that person who sends that text. We can all be the reason someone chooses to stay. We can all create ripples of kindness that spread farther than we'll ever know. Thank you for supporting the center, for supporting this work, and for being the kind of people who believe that every life matters. The applause was thunderous. People were crying, standing, cheering. Emma came back to our table and Karen pulled her into a tight hug. That was incredible, Karen said. You're incredible. Then it was Jake's turn. Patricia introduced him as a crisis counselor, volunteer coordinator, board member, and someone who dedicated his life to suicide prevention. As Jake walked up to the stage, I felt this surge of pride so strong it almost knocked me over. That was my son up there, my son who survived, who thrived, who turned his pain into purpose. Thank you all for being here tonight, Jake began. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's not an easy story, but it's an important one. He told them everything about being 15 and bullied and depressed, about the night he almost ended his life, about Emma's text, about sneaking out to volunteer at the crisis hotline, about the man with the gun in his car, about finding purpose in helping others. He said, I'm standing here tonight because of a series of small miracles, a text message sent at exactly the right moment, a decision to answer the phone instead of letting it ring, a stranger willing to share his story with another stranger. None of these things seemed life-changing in the moment, but they were. He talked about the ripple effect, about his decision to live created opportunities for others to live. He talked about Sarah, who was in the audience, and how they'd unknowingly worked together for years. He talked about the volunteers he'd trained and the lives they've saved. My daughter Grace is 4 months old, Jake said, his voice getting emotional. She exists because Emma sent a text 13 years ago. Think about that. A teenager sending a text message is the reason my daughter is alive today. That's how powerful our actions can be. That's how much we matter to each other. He paused, collecting himself. If you're here tonight and you're struggling, please know that your story isn't over. Please know that the pain you're feeling right now is temporary, but the impact you can have on the world is permanent. Please know that there are people who care, who want to help, who will answer the phone at 3 a.m. when you need them most.
Jake looked directly at our table, at Emma, at Karen and me. And if you're here tonight because you love someone who's struggling, please don't give up on them. Please keep reaching out. Please keep showing them that they matter. Because sometimes we need to borrow hope from other people until we can find our own. He finished his speech by thanking everyone for their support and reminding them that the Crisis Center was available 24/7 for anyone who needed help. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. People were crying openly, hugging each other, pulling out their phones to donate. After the formal program ended, dozens of people came up to Jake and Emma to share their own stories. A woman told Jake that her brother had called the crisis line 2 years ago and was now doing well. A man said his daughter had been helped by Emma's peer support program at school. A teenage girl, probably 17 or 18,
told Jake that she'd been planning to kill herself but had called the hotline instead, and the volunteer she talked to had convinced her to get help. "I'm here because someone answered the phone," the girl said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here because someone cared." Jake hugged her, and I watched my son, this person who'd been so close to ending his own life, comforting someone else who'd been in that same dark place. The symmetry of it, the beauty of it, was almost too much to take in. Later that night, after the gala ended, our whole family went back to Jake and Emma's house. Grace was with the babysitter, and when we got home, she was sleeping soundly in her crib. We all stood around watching her sleep, this perfect little person who represented so much more than just herself. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Emma said, quietly, so as not to wake the baby. "I think about all the other kids out there who need someone to send them that text. All the kids who are sitting in their rooms right now, feeling alone and hopeless, needing just one person to reach out." "That's why we do the work," Jake said, putting his arm around her. "We can't save everyone, but we can try. We can answer the phone. We can train others to answer the phone. We can spread the message that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to ask for help. And we can raise our daughter to be someone who sends those texts, someone who looks out for others, someone who understands that kindness isn't just nice, it's necessary, it's life-saving." I thought about that 12-year-old letter hidden in Jake's closet, the one that had started this whole journey of discovery. That letter had been written by a scared, hopeless teenager who thought he was leaving behind an explanation for his death. Instead, it became a testament to his survival, a roadmap of his journey from darkness to light, a legacy of hope for everyone who heard the story. "You should write a book," I said suddenly. Everyone looked at me. "I'm serious. This story, your story, it needs to be told. There are so many people out there who need to hear it, who need to know that things can get better." Jake thought about it for a moment. "Maybe someday. Right now, I'm focused on the direct work, answering calls, training volunteers, helping individual people. But yeah, maybe someday I'll write it all down." "When you do," Karen said, "make sure you include everything. The bullying, the despair, Emma's text, the crisis hotline, finding each other again, Grace, all of it. Because it's all connected. It's all part of the same story about how love and kindness can literally save the world one person at a time." We stood there for a while longer, just watching Grace sleep, each of us lost in our own thoughts about the strange and beautiful journey that had led us to this moment. A journey that started with a hidden letter, a desperate teenager, and a simple text message sent 13 years ago. As I drove home with Karen that night, I thought about all the alternate timelines that didn't happen. The timeline where Emma didn't send that text. The timeline where Jake went through with his plan. The timeline where we never found those letters. In each of those timelines, so much would be lost. Not just Jake, but everyone he'd helped, everyone Emma had helped, Grace, all the future generations that would come from them. "We almost lost him," Karen said quietly, echoing my thoughts. "We came so close to losing him, and we didn't even know it." "But we didn't lose him," I said, reaching over to hold her hand. "He's here, he's thriving, he's saving lives, and now we get to be part of that story, part of that mission." Do you ever wonder how many other kids out there are hiding letters in their closets? How many families have no idea what their children are going through? All the time, I admitted. But that's why Jake's work is so important. That's why Emma's peer support program matters. That's why we support the Crisis Center. We can't save everyone, but we can try to save as many as possible. When we got home, I went into what used to be Jake's room. We'd converted it into a home office like we'd planned, but I'd kept a few things from his childhood. The letters were in a frame on the wall now, both of them, Jake's letter to us and the letter from the stranger he had saved. Emma had suggested we frame them as a reminder of the power of hope and kindness. I stood there reading them again, probably the 100th time I'd read them since we found them. Every time, they hit me just as hard. Every time, I was reminded of how fragile life is, how precious,
how interconnected. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jake. "Thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for everything. I love you, Dad." I texted back, "Love you too, son. Proud of you. Always have been, always will be." Then I added, "Tell Grace her grandpa is gonna spoil her rotten." He sent back a laughing emoji and, "She's counting on it." I sat down at the desk and pulled out a notebook. Maybe I couldn't write a book like I'd suggested Jake should do, but I could write down our family story. Not for publication, but for Grace, for when she was old enough to understand, for when she asked questions about why her parents did the work they did, why her grandparents volunteered at crisis centers, why her family talked so openly about mental health. I started writing. "Dear Grace, this is the story of how your father almost left this world before you could be born, and how a simple text message from your mother saved him. It's the story of how pain can become purpose, how darkness can lead to light, and how one person's choice to live can create ripples that touch hundreds of lives." I wrote for hours that night, getting down every detail I could remember. The day we found the letters, the conversations with Jake, meeting Sarah, the wedding, Grace's birth, the gala, all of it, because this was a story worth preserving, worth remembering, worth passing down through generations. This was a story about how we're all connected, how we all matter, how we all have the power to save each other in small and big ways. It was a story about hope, not the naive kind that ignores pain, but the hard-won kind that emerges from surviving it. And it was a story that started with a letter hidden in a closet for 12 years, waiting to be found, waiting to reveal the truth about the incredible person our son had become. As I finally closed the notebook around 2 a.m, I thought about Emma's text one more time. Just a few simple words. "Hey, I think you're really cool and I'm glad we're friends." 23 words that changed everything. 23 words that created a chain reaction leading to this moment, to Grace sleeping in her crib, to Jake and Emma building a life together, to hundreds of people getting help when they needed most. Never underestimate the power of reaching out. Never underestimate the impact of showing someone you care. Never underestimate how much your presence in this world matters. Because somewhere out there right now, there's a kid sitting in their room feeling hopeless, feeling alone, feeling like the world would be better off without them, and they're one text message, one phone call, one moment of connection away from choosing to stay. They're one small act of kindness away from becoming the next person who saves lives, who spreads hope, who creates ripples that spread farther than any of us can imagine. And that's the real miracle of this story. Not that Jake survived, though that's miraculous enough. The real miracle is what he did with his survival, how he took his pain and transformed it into a mission, how he answered the phone for strangers in their darkest hours, how he trained others to do the same, how he built a life filled with purpose and love and meaning. The letter Jake hid for 12 years was meant to be an ending. Instead, it became a beginning. The beginning of understanding, of healing, of connection, of legacy. And the story continues. Every day, somewhere, a volunteer answers a crisis line. A teacher notices a struggling student. A friend sends a text to someone who needs it. The ripples keep spreading, the impact keeps growing, the hope keeps multiplying. All because one teenager chose to stay. All because one girl chose to reach out. All because small acts of kindness are never really small at all. They're everything. Several years passed and Grace grew from a baby into a curious, energetic little girl. She was 4 years old now, with her dad's dark hair and her mom's warm smile. Karen and I saw her at least once a week, usually more, and watching her grow up was one of the greatest joys of our lives. One Saturday afternoon, I was at Jake and Emma's house helping Jake build a playset in the backyard. Grace was helping, too, which mostly meant handing us the wrong tools and asking approximately 1,000,000 questions. "Grandpa, why are you making this?" she asked, holding a screwdriver upside down. "So you'll have a fun place to play, sweetheart."
But why? Because we love you and want you to be happy.
But why do you love me? Jake laughed from the other side of the playset. Welcome to the why phase. Everything's a why question now. As we worked, Grace wandered around the yard, picking flowers and talking to herself. At one point, she came running over with a dandelion. Look, Daddy, I got you a flower. Jake stopped what he was doing and knelt down to her level. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. It's 'cause you looked sad, Grace said matter-of-factly. Jake glanced at me, surprised. I wasn't sad, honey. Why did you think I was sad? Grace shrugged. I don't know. You just looked like you needed a flower. Miss Emma says flowers make people happy. Jake pulled her into a hug and I saw his eyes get a little watery. You're absolutely right. This flower made me very happy. You know why? Why? Because it means you're paying attention to how people feel. That's a really special thing to do. Grace beamed at the praise, then ran off to find more dandelions. Jake stood up, watching her go, still holding the flower. She's got Emma's gift, he said quietly. She notices when people are hurting. She reaches out. She's got your gift too, I said. She wants to help. She wants to make things better. God, I hope she never needs it the way I did, Jake said. I hope she never knows that kind of darkness. But if she does, I said, she'll have something you didn't have. She'll have parents who talk openly about mental health. She'll know it's okay to ask for help. She'll never have to hide what she's going through. Jake nodded, twirling the dandelion between his fingers. Emma and I talk about that a lot. How to raise her to be emotionally healthy. How to create an environment where she feels safe sharing anything with us. It's probably our biggest priority as parents. You're doing a great job, I assured him. She's a happy kid. You can see it in everything she does. We finished building the playset and Grace immediately wanted to try it out. She climbed up the ladder, with Jake spotting her the whole way, and went down the slide about 20 times in a row, squealing with delight each time. Again, again, she kept shouting. Emma came outside with lemonade for everyone, and we sat on the patio watching Grace play. It was one of those perfect moments. Sunny afternoon, happy kid, family together. The kind of moment that feels so normal, you almost forget how miraculous it is that it exists at all. I got an email yesterday, Emma said, taking a sip of her lemonade, from a former student. She graduated 3 years ago and just finished her first year of college. That's great, Karen said. What'd she say? Emma pulled out her phone and read the email aloud. Dear Miss Patterson, I'm not sure if you remember me, but I was in your English class during my junior year. I wanted to reach out and thank you for something you probably don't even remember doing. One day after class, you noticed I seemed upset and asked if I was okay. You told me I was fine, but you said, my door's always open if you need to talk. That night, I was planning to hurt myself. But I remembered what you said, and the next day, I came to your classroom during lunch. You listened to me for an hour, and then you helped me get connected with the school counselor. I've been in therapy ever since, and I'm doing so much better now. I'm majoring in psychology, and I want to help teenagers the way you helped me. Thank you for noticing. Thank you for caring. Thank you for giving me a reason to ask for help. You saved my life. Emma's voice broke on the last sentence, and she wiped her eyes. I barely remember that conversation. It was just a normal day, just something I'd say to any student who seemed off. But for her, it was everything. That's the thing about this work, Jake said, watching Grace on the swings. You never know which moment is going to be the one that matters. You never know which conversation is going to save someone's life. So you have to treat every moment like it might be that important. It's exhausting, though, isn't it? Karen asked, carrying that responsibility. Sometimes, Emma admitted. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is not paying attention, not reaching out, and then wondering later if you could have made a difference. Grace ran over, breathless and grinning. Mommy, Daddy, watch me do the monkey bars. We all watched as she carefully made her way across the monkey bars, her little face scrunched up in concentration. She made it halfway before dropping off, but she was so proud of herself. Did you see? Did you see? She asked, running back over to us. We saw. You were amazing, Emma said, scooping her up. I'm going to practice every day until I can do all of them. Grandpa, will you help me? Of course, sweetheart. As I helped Grace practice on the monkey bars, holding her waist while she reached from bar to bar, I thought about perseverance, about not giving up, about trying again even when you fall. Simple lessons learned on a backyard playset, but somehow they felt connected to everything else. To Jake not giving up that night 15 years ago, to Emma not giving up on her students, to all of us choosing to keep going, keep trying, keep reaching out. Later that evening, after Karen and I had gone home, Jake called me. "Hey, Dad, you got a minute?" "Always. What's up?" "I've been thinking about what you said a few years ago, about writing a book." My heart jumped. "Yeah? I think I'm ready to do it. I've been keeping notes, collecting stories from people I've helped, getting their permission to share their experiences. I want to write something that could help people who are struggling and also help their families understand what they're going through." "That's incredible, Jake. Have you talked to Emma about it?" "Yeah, she's totally supportive. Actually, she wants to co-write it with me. Her perspective as someone who unknowingly saved someone and then later became a mental health advocate, she thinks that's important to include." "When are you going to start?" "Already started, actually. I've been writing for a few months now. I may be a quarter of the way through. I wanted to wait to tell you until I was sure I could actually finish it." "Can I read what you have so far?" There was a pause. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. I'd love for you and Mom to read it and give me feedback. You're such a huge part of the story. I want to make sure I'm telling it right." "We'd be honored," I said, my voice getting thick with emotion. A few days later, Jake emailed us the manuscript, about 80 pages so far. Karen and I sat down together to read it, and we couldn't put it down. Jake's writing was raw and honest, pulling no punches about how dark things had gotten for him. He described the bullying in detail, the isolation, the night he almost ended everything. Reading it was painful, but it was also beautiful because we knew how the story turned out. He wrote about Emma's text from her perspective too, how she'd been having a hard day herself, how she'd been scrolling through her contacts trying to think of something nice to do for someone, how she'd landed on Jake's name and sent the message without overthinking it. "I almost didn't send it," she'd told him years later when they were piecing together that night. "I typed it out, then deleted it, then typed it again. I was worried it would seem weird or random, but something made me hit send." The manuscript included stories from people Jake had helped over the years, all anonymous, but all powerful. A woman who'd called the crisis line after a miscarriage left her devastated. A college student who had been sexually assaulted and couldn't see a way forward. A military veteran struggling with PTSD. A middle-aged man who had lost everything in a divorce and couldn't find a reason to keep going. Each story followed a similar pattern: darkness, desperation, a call for help, a conversation with someone who cared, a decision to hold on, and then, slowly, gradually, things getting better. Not perfect, not fixed, but better, manageable, survivable. Jake also wrote about the ripple effects. Sarah's story was in there, with her permission. The story of the man with the gun in the parking lot, whose daughters got to grow up with their father. Stories of volunteers Jake had trained who'd gone on to help hundreds of people themselves.
"It's like a tree," Jake wrote in one chapter. "One seed planted, one act of kindness, one moment of compassion, and then it grows. Branches spread out, reaching more people, creating more moments, planting more seeds. Eventually, you have this whole forest of hope, and you can't even see where it started anymore. But it all traces back to someone choosing to care." When Karen and I finished reading, we both just sat there for a while. "This is going to help so many people," Karen finally said. "So many families who don't understand what their kids are going through. So many teenagers who think they're alone. This is important." "He's a hell of a writer, too," I added. "I mean, I knew he was smart, but this is really good." We gave Jake our feedback, minor suggestions, mostly just encouragement to keep going. He worked on the book for another year, writing in the early mornings before Grace woke up and in the late evenings after she went to bed. Emma wrote several chapters from her perspective, talking about her work with students and the importance of creating safe spaces for young people to talk about mental health. The book was titled The Text Message: How Small Acts of Kindness Create Ripples of Hope. Jake found a literary agent who loved it, and within a few months, they had a publishing deal with a major publisher. They want to release it during Mental Health Awareness Month next May, Jake told us excitedly. And they're planning a whole campaign around it. Speaking tours, podcast interviews, partnerships with mental health organizations. How do you feel about going public with all of this? Emma asked him. Once the book's out, everyone's going to know your story. Jake thought about it. I used to be terrified of people knowing, but now I think it's important. If my story can help even one person choose to stay alive, it's worth it. If our story can help one family start having conversations about mental health, it's worth it. The months leading up to the publication were busy. Jake and Emma did advance interviews, worked with the publisher on marketing materials, and prepared for the book tour. Grace, now 5 years old, didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew Mommy and Daddy had written a book and everyone was very excited about it. Is it a storybook, like the ones you read me at bedtime? Kind of. It's a true story about how people can help each other when things are hard. Like when I gave Daddy the flower because he looked sad. Exactly like that, sweetie. Exactly like that. The book was released on a Tuesday in May, and Jake had scheduled a reading and signing at a local bookstore that evening. The place was packed, probably 200 people crammed into a space meant for maybe 100. Patricia was there with a bunch of folks from the crisis center. Sarah came with her husband. Emma's students, both current and former, filled several rows. Our extended family showed up. Even some of Jake's old high school friends made it, including a few of the kids who'd bullied him back then. I reached out to them, Jake explained when I asked about it. I wanted them to know I forgave them, and I wanted them to understand the impact their actions had. A couple of them apologized, said they'd been dealing with their own stuff back then and took it out on me. One of them actually became a school counselor because of the guilt he carried. He works with kids who bully others now, trying to break the cycle. More ripples, I thought. Even the painful parts of Jake's story had created opportunities for growth and change. Jake stood at the podium, Emma beside him, and began to read from the first chapter. His voice was steady and clear as he described that 15-year-old boy sitting in his room, holding a bottle of pills, convinced that the world would be better off without him. You could hear a pin drop in that bookstore. People were crying, nodding, holding hands with the person next to them. When Jake read the part about Emma's text, about how those simple words had pulled him back from the edge, he had to pause and collect himself. "Sorry," he said, wiping his eyes. "Even after all these years, this part still gets me." "Don't apologize," someone called out from the audience. "We're all crying with you." Jake finished the reading with the chapter about Grace's birth, about holding his daughter for the first time and thinking about all the moments that had to happen exactly right for her to exist. "If you take nothing else from this book," Jake said, looking out at the crowd, "please take this. Your life matters. Your story isn't over. The pain you're feeling right now is real and it's valid, but it's not permanent. Things can get better. They got better for me. They got better for every person whose story is in this book, and they can get better for you too." The applause was thunderous. People stood, cheering, some of them openly sobbing. Jake and Emma signed books for over 2 hours, and almost everyone who came through the line had a story to share. Someone who'd lost a sibling to suicide, someone who'd attempted themselves and survived, someone who worked in mental health, someone who'd been helped by the crisis center, someone whose kid was currently struggling. One woman, probably in her 60s, waited until the very end of the line. When she finally got to the table, she was shaking. "My son died by suicide 20 years ago. He was 17. I've spent 20 years wondering what I could have done differently, what signs I missed, if I failed him as a mother." Jake stood up and came around the table, taking her hands in his. "You didn't fail him," he said gently. "Depression lies to people. It tells them they're a burden, that everyone would be better off without them. Your son believed those lies. That wasn't your fault. But if I'd known,
You would have helped. Of course you would have. But sometimes people hide their pain so well that even the people who love them most can't see it. That doesn't make you a bad parent. That makes your son someone who was very good at hiding how much he was hurting. The woman broke down crying, and Jake just held her while she sobbed. Emma came around and joined the hug. Karen and I watched from a few feet away, tears streaming down our own faces. After a few minutes, the woman pulled back and said, "Thank you. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for helping me understand that it wasn't my fault. Your son's life mattered, and I'm sure he made a difference in ways you might not even know about. The fact that you're here, that you're still trying to understand, that you care enough to read this book, that tells me he was lucky to have you as his mom."
After everyone had left and the bookstore closed, our little group, Jake, Emma, Karen, me, Patricia, and Sarah, went out for late-night coffee at a diner nearby. We were all emotionally exhausted, but also energized. "I can't believe how many people showed up," Jake said, still looking a bit dazed. "I thought maybe 50 people would come." "Your story resonates with people," Patricia said. "Everyone either knows someone who struggled with mental health or they've struggled themselves. You're giving voice to something that people have been afraid to talk about." "The book's already climbing the bestseller lists," Emma added, checking her phone. "It's number 15 on Amazon right now." "People are hungry for hope," Sarah said. "They're hungry for stories that say, 'I was in the darkness, but I made it through.' Your book gives them that." Over the next few weeks, the text message became a phenomenon. It hit the New York Times bestseller list. Jake and Emma were invited to speak on national talk shows, on podcasts, at conferences. Schools started using it in their health classes. Therapy practices were recommending it to clients. Crisis centers were giving it to their volunteers as required reading. The book's success brought more opportunities. Jake was invited to consult with schools on developing better mental health support systems. Emma was asked to train teachers across the country on recognizing warning signs and creating safe spaces for students. Together, they started a foundation focused on suicide prevention and mental health education, funded partly by the book's proceeds. "We're calling it the Ripple Effect Foundation," Jake told us at a family dinner, "because that's what we want to create. Ripples of hope and kindness spreading out across the world." Grace, now starting first grade, was old enough to understand a bit more about what her parents did for work. One night when Jake was tucking her into bed, she asked, "Daddy, why do you talk to sad people on the phone?" Jake sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Because sometimes when people are really sad, they feel alone. They feel like nobody understands what they're going through. So I talk to them and listen to them, and I help them see that they're not alone." "And that makes them not sad anymore?" "Well, not right away. Being really sad, what we call depression, takes time to get better. But talking to someone can help. It can remind people that things won't always feel this way." "Were you really sad once?" Jake nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. When I was younger, I was very sad." "But you're not sad anymore?" "Not like I was then. I still have sad days sometimes. Everybody does. But I know how to handle them now. And I have people who love me, like Mommy and you, and Grandma and Grandpa." Grace thought about this for a minute, then said, "I'm glad you're not sad anymore. I'm glad you're my daddy." He pulled her into a tight hug, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I'm glad I'm your daddy too, baby girl. So, so glad." As the foundation grew, Jake and Emma hired staff and expanded their programs. They created a network of trained volunteers who could go into schools and talk about mental health. They developed an app that connected people in crisis with immediate support. They funded research into youth suicide prevention. They partnered with social media companies to identify and help at-risk users. Everything they built was based on that core principle. Small acts of kindness create ripples of hope. One particular meaningful moment came about 2 years after the book's release. Jake got an email from a teenage girl named Maya who lived across the country. She'd read the book after a teacher gave it to her, and she wrote to tell Jake that his story had saved her life. "I was planning to kill myself," she wrote. "I had the method picked out, the date chosen, everything ready. But then I read your book and I realized that if I went through with it, I'd never know what ripples I might create. I'd never know whose life I might touch or what impact I might have. So I told my parents I needed help, and I'm in therapy now. I'm starting to feel like maybe life is worth living. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." Jake was so moved by the email that he asked if he could call her. With her parents' permission, they had a long phone conversation. He encouraged her, shared more of his story, and connected her family with local resources. They stayed in touch over the months that followed, and Jake got to watch from a distance as Maya slowly got better. A year later, Maya sent him another email with a photo attached. In the picture, she was standing in front of her high school wearing a t-shirt that said, "Suicide Prevention Advocate." She'd started a mental health awareness club at her school and was training as a peer counselor. "You created a ripple, and now I'm creating my own." At a foundation event later that year, Jake told Maya's story, with her permission, to illustrate the power of sharing our struggles. "I'll never meet the most of the people whose lives this book touches, but I know they're out there. I know there are kids reading it right now who are making the decision to stay alive. I know there are parents reading it who are learning how to talk to their children about mental health. I know there are teachers and counselors and healthcare providers reading it who are getting better at recognizing and responding to people in crisis." He paused, looking out at the audience of donors and supporters. "And here's the beautiful thing. Every single one of you can create these same ripples. You don't have to write a book or start a foundation. You just have to pay attention. You just have to reach out when you notice someone struggling. You just have to be willing to say, 'I'm here. I care. You matter.'" The foundation's signature program became something they called Text Someone Tuesday. Every Tuesday, they encouraged people to send a kind message to someone in their life, just like Emma had done all those years ago. The campaign went viral, with millions of people participating. They even tracked stories of lives saved through the program, texts sent at just the right moment to people who desperately needed them. One woman wrote in to say she'd been about to overdose when her phone buzzed with a text from her old college roommate. "Thinking of you today. Hope you're doing well. Miss you." The woman broke down crying, realized someone still cared, and called 911 instead. A teenage boy received a text from his grandfather, "Proud of you, kiddo. Love you." He'd been planning to hang himself that night, but the text made him reconsider. He's now in college studying social work. The stories kept coming, dozens of them, then hundreds, each one a life saved by a simple message, each one proof that Emma's text to Jake 15 years ago had created ripples that were still spreading, still touching lives, still making a difference. Jake and Emma's work didn't just save lives in the moment, it changed the culture around mental health. Slowly, talking about depression and suicide became less stigmatized. Young people started reaching out for help earlier, parents started having difficult conversations with their kids, schools implemented better support systems. The ripples just kept spreading, wider and wider, touching more and more people. Now, when I look back on that day when I found those letters in Jake's closet, I'm overwhelmed by everything that's happened since. That single moment of discovery led to so much: understanding, healing, purpose, and ultimately a movement that's touched countless lives. Karen and I are in our 70s now. We still volunteer at the Crisis Center 1 shift a week. We still attend foundation events. We still watch with pride as our son and daughter-in-law continue to change the world, one person at a time. And we watch Grace grow up in an environment where mental health is discussed openly, where asking for help is seen as strength, not weakness, where kindness is valued above almost everything else. She's 8 now, and already she's showing signs of following her parents' footsteps.
Last week, she came home from school and told us about a new girl in her class who seemed lonely. So I sat with her at lunch and I asked if she wanted to play at recess. She said yes, and now we're friends. That was very kind of you, Emma said. Well, you guys always say that everyone needs someone who cares, so I wanted to be that person for her. Jake caught my eye across the room and we both smiled. Another generation learning the same lesson. Another ripple beginning to spread. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I never cleaned out that closet, if I never found those letters. Would Jake have eventually told us? Would we ever have fully understood the depth of what he'd been going through and the magnitude of what he'd accomplished? Maybe. Maybe not. But I'm grateful we found them when we did. I'm grateful for every single moment that's happened since. The tears, the revelations, the pride, the purpose, all of it. That letter Jake hid for 12 years wasn't just a confession or an explanation. It was a seed that grew into understanding, that blossomed into a movement that created a forest of hope where thousands of people have found shelter and strength. And it all started with the simplest things. A teenage girl deciding to send a kind text, a troubled boy deciding to hold on for one more day, a parent finally understanding the child they thought they knew. Small acts, huge impact, ripples that never stop spreading. That's the real story of the letter my son hid for 12 years. And the story continues, every single day, with every person who chooses kindness, who reaches out, who decides that other people's lives matter.
The story continues with you reading this right now. What ripple will you create today? Who will you reach out to? Whose life might you touch without even knowing it? Because you never know. You really never know. That simple message you send, that small gesture you make, that moment you choose to care, it might just save someone's life. And that life might go on to save others. And those people might save even more. The ripples never stop. They just keep spreading, creating waves of hope across an ocean of humanity. All because someone decided to care. All because someone decided to reach out. All because small acts of kindness are never really small at all. They're everything. The end.